What's going on, my friends? I wanted to take a few minutes of your time to talk to you guys about a new series that we're releasing on October 7th, and it's going to be our live Reloading Evolution series. We decided to do this a little different than our previous master classes, and we wanted to run this live. I think this is a better way of delivering information to you guys, and I think you're going to enjoy it as well. I want to hit the easy button too. However, I have a solid enough background in understanding all of the components and fundamentals that go into making solid, reliable, and consistent ammunition that I can fall back on and troubleshoot in the event that that super secret, awesome recipe that your buddy uses doesn't actually work for you. So in this series, we're going to take you down a road and along a journey to help you create the most accurate, reliable, and repeatable ammunition for your individual firearm. We're going to do this over the course of 6 live lessons. We're going to do this Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, starting on October 7th, and we're going to kick this off at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So in those lessons, we're going to be taking you along a logical path of how this all works in progression. On Thursday, we're going to do a live question and answer session to give you an opportunity to let the information soak and give you an opportunity to ask questions to solidify all those concepts. We're going to be a couple of days off, and then we're following up the following Monday. Again, same thing, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and then we're going to follow everything up with one last live Q&A session on that Thursday. So once this has all been recorded, we are going to then cut this information up and put it into a logical format inside our Reloading Evolution series space found at moderndayRifleman.com. For $347, I think this is a pretty solid program. It's one of the most comprehensive programs, if not the most comprehensive program out there in the digital space, and it's 12 hours worth of content for you, including the Q&A sessions. So if you're interested, cruise on over to moderndayRifleman.com, knock on that Reloading Evolution series space door, and see what we have to offer. The best defense is good data. Yeah. Yeah. So that's it. So how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How are
Right
you?
on. I'm doing good. It's good to see you, man. It's good to see you here, and good to have you back on the podcast. I'm pumped to have this conversation with you because it's been something that's a lot of the subjects that we're going to talk about have been on my mind quite a bit lately, and not only just from a shooting standpoint, but just from personal development, and learning more about myself and learning more about what makes me tick behind my rifle and when I'm looking through my optic and making the decisions and the conscious decisions to solve the problems that are in front of me. And it's like for a little while, man, I got a little bit burnt out. And I was just like, I wasn't in it. I wasn't into it. And I was kind of like searching for other things to do. And it definitely affected the way that I approached shooting. And so I
So
feel
what is it that burnt you out? Was it like, is it because it's just like too much time training and not enough time for personal life? Was it like, what was burning you out?
probably just feeling scattered, right? Building a business, making sure that the business is running, um, and churning, and then thinking that my attention needed to be in places that ultimately it didn't really need to be. Um, and it was really actually just like on my part, just a little bit of poor time management, and not prioritizing the tasks that I need to prioritize. And then it was just like shooting then became a chore. And so um, that didn't feel really good. And I kind of felt like I was in this rut and this slump. And so what really helped was going to get some coaching from another upper echelon shooter. And once I got that coaching, it was just like, hey man, like, I don't know what your problem is, but everything that I'm seeing, you're doing everything that I'm doing. So like, I don't know what else to tell you in this scenario. But
You
you're
we talked a while ago. Like, man, it's been probably like several months, and we were just kind of catching up. And I remember I asked you specifically of like what's the newest idea? Like what area
Hmm.
are you digging into now? Because like we do that. Like I'll be digging into something, you'll be digging into something, and then we try to like see if there's any sort of overlap. And you would, I won't even try to recount it, but you told me about a friend of yours who's like a high level bow hunter, bow competitor, and you guys were talking about um, like modern day sniper has this really good thing where it talks about like sight wobble and understanding sight wobble and everything. And then you were talking about there's a thing you were digging into where trigger control was being related to sight wobble, and then talking to this friend of yours.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't even want to try to recount it. Do you remember? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I
The
absolutely do. I do. And it's interesting because I had this, I was digging through a bunch of old stuff. I did a podcast yesterday with Jacob Bynum of Rifles Only, and that was for his podcast. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday. And I was actually digging through, remember the photo I sent you?
yeah,
So
yeah,
I was digging through that box and I had a bunch of photos and then I uncovered a bunch of trophies in there. And those trophies were all from high school and I totally forgot about this. I don't know whether I just spaced it out because I was like getting ready to join the Marine Corps or, whatever it was. But I competed indoor archery league for three seasons, sophomore, junior, and senior year in high school. And I uncovered all these like first and second and third place trophies and for all the leagues that I shot. And then that was really like I archery was way easier to access for me than firearms were. Like I could shoot my bow quite often,
yeah,
whereas shooting a firearm, I had to go someplace to make that happen. And nobody really talked about dry fire at that point in time. I was a teenager, and we were teenagers, and it was like the mid '90s. So um, that was back when everybody thought dry fire was going to break your gun. So so um, I shot my bow quite a bit, and then I started to think about that. I was like, man, I cut my teeth with marksmanship, largely shooting bows, and the correlation between the two. Whether you're shooting a rifle or whether you're shooting a firearm, whether you're shooting a firearm or whether you're shooting a bow, I truly believe that the psychology and the neurobiology behind those two activities are the same. What you're attempting to do is you're really trying to harness and understand how your brain processes visual stimulus
yeah,
and then makes decisions on what to do with that visual stimulus. And I mean, I remember even as a young teenager, like, hey, if you punch the trigger, like with an archery release, you have a trigger release. It's very similar to a firearm.
yeah.
And um, I never shot fingers. I shot fingers a little bit, but I went right to a release. And it's like, well, I was taught how to shoot a rifle at a young age by a Marine. And they always taught me, like, hey, you marry your finger to the trigger, you press up against the hard spot in the trigger, and you hold it there until you see the sight picture that you want. And then you finalize and finish the press. That was how I was taught. So that was what I knew was acceptable behavior at that point in time for marksmanship. And I would watch these guys with these releases and their fingers like way out here. And then when they're ready to shoot, they just, slap that trigger. And I didn't deal with target panic until later on in life. Um, After I got out of the Marines, same like this story. Like I got out of the Marines and I was like not in a good psychological place just based upon like what happened and the traumatic experience of getting blown up in combat and then coming home and then realizing that you're not going to ever do that again, right? All your mates are going to keep going and you're just going to hang out and mark time in limbo. And so when I moved up here to Washington, I didn't shoot a rifle for about 18 months, 24 months. And I went right back into bow hunting. And I shot leagues, and I did pretty well. But I was in a larger pool of shooters, right? A larger pool of shooters. And I was like seeing these dudes that were absolute machines. And I just wasn't exposed to that in, my little nook of Western New York, Niagara Falls area. Um, it wasn't nearly as big as it was out here in the West. So I learned a lot. I learned everything really that I didn't know. And then I started to kind of correlate these activities to shooting a rifle, which then helped me develop some of the drills and some of the skills that we still see in modern day sniper classes to this day, because I find them really, really useful. But the connection between what you see and this is really, I believe, where the magic happens. And to be able to see what you need to see and then go, that's the right thing. Now I need to make this work to not move the rifle. Um, and then I learned, like, I did some math and I realized, like, I was sitting here with Ted Courageous from American Rifle Company, and he was like, hey, you know that if you move the buttstock 0.003 of an inch, literally the size of a human hair, if you had a laser in your barrel, it would move it a half of an inch at that 100-yard target. And I was like, I looked at him and I go, whoa, I never actually thought of it that way. And he was like, yeah, that's what it is. And so I was like, okay, that opened Pandora's box in and of itself, and going, oh, okay, well, yeah, there's something to this. So I mean, that's why I want to talk to you about this, because your background in psychology and neuroscience and
Yeah.
understanding how all this stuff works.
So well, the first thing is anyone that's ever tried to uh, shoot accurately with any system
Mm-hmm.
immediately wants they want to play a video game where like the aiming point is like fixed and they just move it. And like a video game, I move it there and then it's steady. And then I get the crosshair or the aiming point, whatever it is I'm using to aim. I put it where I want and it's steady, and then I pull the trigger or push a button.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's up to the physics and my ability to predict, my dope setting and my ballistic calculator, my wind call, all that stuff was correct. And then it becomes a test of that, almost like an F class shooter or a bench rush shooter. Like you're testing the system and the ballistic calculations.
Mm-hmm.
But then in reality, when you're behind the weapon system, you get behind there and the aiming point's not steady. It's
Right.
moving around, and immediately you get frustrated because you're goal oriented, right? And when you don't achieve your goal, the natural human response is frustration, right? And so you're letting frustration in the door. So I want my aiming point to be right where I want it, at the center mass of the target, or if I'm holding off, whatever. And but when I try to do that, it's not, it's moving. And the temptation, well, first of all, you get frustrated, which doesn't help, which eliminates your ability to focus. And then secondly, you start focusing on your body, right? My body's doing something. I gotta correct my body.
Mm-hmm.
My aiming point's moving left. I need to adjust for that and move it back right. Or it's
Mm-hmm.
moving right. I gotta move it left. It's up, down, whatever. Wait for the natural pause in my breath if that's what's causing the movement. It becomes about you trying to control your body to stop the movement, and it's like you can't win.
Right.
And uh, the conversation that me and you had, you mentioned that you were talking to somebody, and you would, and this guy's like way to handle that the sights move, which modern day sniper calls sight wobble,
Wobble on.
and you say, what do you do about sight wobble? Like, are you super steady? Like when you pull up your aiming point, is it like rock solid? And he's like, no. And you talk to any competition shooter that's not like F class, somewhere where there's a shooter behind it. They're like, no, the sight's moving. I'm like, well,
Mm-hmm.
how the hell do you hit everything and other people miss?
Mm-hmm.
And like I don't let the sight wobble bother me.
Right.
And you'd mentioned that you get that right when it comes down time to shoot, you adjust your position enough where the sight wobble is small enough that it's within an acceptable margin, and then you say that's good enough. It's good enough to hit what I want to hit, and then
Mm-hmm.
from there you focus on the trigger pull. Because the
Hmm.
trigger pull, if you screw that up, just like you said, if you move even a millimeter or even a fraction of a millimeter, it's going to translate to something much larger depending on how far away the target is you're shooting, just by angular growth.
Hmm.
So, uh, and you said by focusing on your trigger pull, you're both um, making your trigger pull better by focusing on it, but then you're also distracting from your visual stimulus of the sight wobble and psychologically not letting it bother you to the point where you're just losing all control of what you're doing.
Right.
Yeah, and just getting emotionally invested into the sight wobble.
I'm glad you brought up the word emotion, and you touched on that with using the word frustration. Um, and so back up. So that guy that I was talking to, his name is Cody Vormans, and he was an Olympic rifle shooter. And he came to one of my rifle classes long ago, it's like 2014, 2013, and he's a good shooter, very non-presumptuous individual. Like I didn't even know that he was an Olympic shooter because he was there to be a student, and he was not, you know, he wasn't like Spotlight Ranger. I did this, I did that. So I open up the line, let students shoot, and I turn around, and Cody's in the offhand, right? with with a no sling, just a hunting rifle. He was a pro shooter for on the pro staff for Proof Research. And I'm observing from afar, and I'm just like, let's see what this guy can do. And like he was hitting shit at 800, 900, 1,000, and he was just very, very calm, collected. And he would sit and he would aim, and you'd see him breathe in and out, doing everything that you and I were taught to do in, basic marksmanship block at recruit training battalion. And he was just letting go these shots and hitting what he was aiming at. And I've never really been a great offhand shooter with a scoped rifle. It's always been something that I've struggled with. And he was the guy that called me up after that class, and he was like, "Hey, is that really what are you really looking at when you're aiming, when you're aiming your rifle?" And then my immediate, automatic response was, I'm looking at my sights. And then he goes, "You sure about that?" And then I go, "Well, no, now I'm not. So now I got to go look at this." And as soon as I started to really understand that, and not necessarily, it's not that we were taught dogmatic processes. They're all functioning. They all work. They're all required to be a part of the equation to get the end result. Um, However, what we weren't taught was just the psychology behind what was going on. And I think it's really important for us to look back and go, like, something as simple as the ball and dummy drill. Like it's the very first drill that you go to when you're teaching somebody how to shoot a pistol, and you can tell that they're flinching. And I would love to hear you discuss what the body's natural response is to that explosive stimulus. Because I also talked to a guy by the name of Tony Blauer, and he owns a company called No Fear, and he focuses specifically on the body's response to the stimulus and emotion of fear. And we talked about this, like the body's startle response and the neurobiological pathways that are established and firmly rooted in our DNA that is there to protect us from this explosion. So I'd love to hear what you got to say about that too.
Well, so uh, I want to step on a soapbox for a second, if you'll bear with me.
Step on it, stand tall.
But the first thing I will say is the startle response is real. You can't avoid it. Um, but I will say that the startle response can either be in reaction to the recoil and firing of the weapon,
Hmm.
or it can be in anticipation.
Right.
You don't want it to be in anticipation, because then you're gonna preempt the startle response, and you're gonna start flinching and tensing your muscles and everything. And this is common marksmanship knowledge, and we call it anticipation. If you're anticipating it because you think it's something scary because you haven't experienced it, then you're gonna anticipate it and prime yourself, and you're gonna start flinching and tensing your muscles, and your psychology is going to be anywhere other than what it should be,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's nothing new. And that's old hat. So you need to shoot enough that you feel comfortable just taking the recoil. Um, Once the recoil hits your body, it is going to trigger an automatic startle response, and your eyes are going to blink, and you're going to have a little bit of tensing in the muscles for a few milliseconds. But that's going to be happening after the bullet has left the muzzle, so it's not affecting the sight picture and the trajectory of the bullet, which means it doesn't matter. And hopefully you can recover from that uh, fast enough to see the impact of your bullet.
That's where it starts to matter. Yeah,
All right. But it also matters if you're anticipating it.
for sure.
But I want to
Yeah.
things up a little bit.
Okay.
I think what people haven't been thinking about is we need to back it up a little bit. And to do that, like I have this a sort of hypothetical situation that I've created in my brain to explain it. So let's imagine you're in a tactical environment and you pop up from behind cover to find and engage a bad guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you scan over, and right as you scan over, for this situation, exactly 100 meters away, you see a muzzle flash. And that muzzle flash is a bad guy who has this stuff dialed in, and he sees you, and he just shot. And he's 100 meters away. The question is there anything you can do about it from that point? Or are you just dead? And
Well,
and
yeah.
so when you break that down, I break it down into 3 or 4 categories. The first category is the external world, which means the bullet. The bullet's going to do what it's going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And let's call it a 30 caliber bullet, and it's got, at 100 meters, it's got a time of flight of about 100 milliseconds, or about
Mm-hmm.
0.1 of a second,
Mm-hmm.
right? The question is, um, can you do anything about that? Can you physically react and duck or dodge or do something? And when you look at it, you look at the science behind it. All right, so we know that from the time that muzzle flash happens, the light from that muzzle flash, the photons, they're going to reach your eye in about 3 billionths of a second, so almost instantaneously. So it's going to reach your retina much faster than the bullet. So the bullet's still traveling, but the light hits your eye. The problem is, from the time it hits your eye, you still aren't consciously aware of it. You still haven't seen it. Now it has to go through transduction, which is basically from photons into the biochemical process of how the brain operates, which is neuron to neuron transmission. And for the visual cortex, from the time a stimulus reaches your retina to the time it reaches your visual cortex, which is at the back of your brain, it's on the opposite side of your skull, it's going to take about 1,000th of a second, which is roughly the time it's taking for a 30 caliber bullet, to reach you from 100 meters away. So the reality is by the time your brain even processes what it's seeing, the bullet's already there.
Mm-hmm.
So the reality is no. In fact, if you scan over and someone is shooting at you, the muzzle flash, about the same time the bullet hits you in the face is about the time your brain is going to start registering a muzzle flash.
I'm getting shot at.
Yep. And it's
Yep.
way too late. So the first category is the physical world outside. In this case, the bullet. And we see we don't have enough time because the bullet's so close. Right? Now, if they were 1,000 yards away, or 1,000 meters away, you have more time. Right? The time it takes from the retina to the occipital lobe to reach what we would call recognition is widely considered to be about 1,000 milliseconds, or 0.1 of a second. That's just to reach recognition. That's category 2. Category 3 is once the brain reaches recognition, the brain now has to generate a new signal to the muscles to react. In this case, duck, move, startle response. You know, and that can take, depending on depending on you and your rehearsal and all those things, it can take another 2 to 3 thousandths of a second, another 0.2 to 0.3. So now you're talking of a second, potentially, between the time this hits your eye to when you move. And what that means is that if I'm going to be able to dodge a bullet from the time I recognize a muzzle flash to being able to just move my head far enough that it doesn't hit me, I'm going to need about half a second. And how far away does someone have to be before you have a half a second time of flight?
About 400 yards.
Yeah.
You got about 400 yards.
So, but I bring that up just to bring up these 3 categories. 1 is the external reality. 2 is the time it takes the visual system to process what it's seeing to the point of recognition. And then the 3rd category is reaction time somatically in the body.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So now, why am I even saying this? Right. When it comes to marksmanship and your sights, we've all heard about sight picture sight alignment, right? Focus
Mm-hmm.
on the aim point, which is a visual process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I understand everybody has different reticles where you often, all I'm saying is that, like, whatever your aiming point is, for this case, we'll say a center reticle on center of mass.
Mm-hmm.
Make it simple. I'm trying to hold center reticle on center mass of the target I'm shooting, right? So the external world is now the position in my scope of this target and this external crosshair in my scope. That's an external category.
Mm-hmm.
That image now has to enter my retina and then be processed, which is going to
Yep.
take another 0.1 of a second before I recognize where the reticle pattern is on the target.
Mm-hmm.
So if I see the reticle pattern shifting to the right because my body's just moving, because it's unstable or breathing with heart rate, whatever's causing it, before my brain even recognizes where that reticle pattern is, it's already 0.1 second behind the reality.
Yep.
Then what's going to happen is my brain's going to see that, and it's going to generate a signal to my body to compensate for it.
Mm-hmm.
So then it sends a signal, which is another anywhere from 0.1 to 0.3 seconds in response time for my body, for the muscles to react to it.
Right.
As that, 0.1 to 0.4 seconds of time is elapsing, the physical reality of where the reticle pattern is has changed. So I have this lag in my visual system of a couple hundred thousandths of a second of lag between it being processed and me recognizing it and sending a signal to my body. If you are hyper focused on the crosshairs need to be at the exact center aim point before I'll pull the trigger, you have to know that physically, biologically, and cognitively, you have an automatic few hundred thousandths of a second lag that you cannot change. It is a feature of reality. And if you're constantly trying to see, I see the crosshairs there, let me move them back, and you try to do that, and then by the time you made the adjustment in your muscles to do that, the crosshair is already a couple hundred thousandths of a second ahead of you, and it's already in the wrong direction. And by the time you catch up to that, you kind of move it back, and you're just chasing. We call it chasing the sights. And the reason for that is because of the lag time of the visual system, and then that having to reach recognition of where your aiming point is, and then generate a signal to your body to correct for it. The lag time is just too much. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot fix that. It's just, I mean, you can try to make your position as stable as possible so that
Hmm.
there's less wobble, and you should do that. But there's always going to be some movement. And so if you're psychologically anticipating and waiting for that thing to just be right in the center, uh, and every time it moves from there, psychologically it generates this emotion where, oh, it's not right. I got to physically move my body. I got to move muscles. I got to do something. You're always, by definition, always going to be behind the power curve, and that's called chasing your sights.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so that I think is exactly what I got fixated on when we had that discussion. And when like and the some remedies to that you've been addressing is one is first of all accept the wobble zone, uh, minimize the wobble zone to an acceptable parameter where it's within the target, let's say,
Hmm.
and then if it's there, psychologically and emotionally, forget about it. So what you're doing is by talking about minimizing and having an acceptable wobble zone or movement of the reticle, what you're doing is you're setting a new goal, a new anticipation, which is more realistic. It's like if I'm there, then I'm good, and then I need to stop emotionally reacting to it and trying to compensate for it physically in my body.
Hmm.
You're accepting this lag, and so you accept that. And then another thing you brought up was one way to help with that, because one thing that can really screw that up is an improper trigger pull very easily. So if you get the right wobble zone, you hit the right wobble zone, you're like, okay, I'm good. I don't need to work on my position anymore. Now I'm just going to focus on the trigger pull. And psychologically, you're shifting from the visual stimulus, which is very hard to deny and not chase your sights. You're mentally what we call covert attention. Covertly, yeah, you're still seeing the sights, but covertly you're putting your attention into the physical um, body and where you're pulling the trigger, and you're focusing on that, which is taking your attention away from chasing the sights and putting it into something else that matters, which is the trigger pull, and you're just doing that. And so all I'm trying to do is explain that that is valid, it's true, and the reason for that is because if you keep focusing visually on your sights, it is almost impossible not to chase your sights and send a signal to your body to try to correct what you're seeing.
Right.
I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does. It absolutely makes sense because I think the byproduct of that is um, when you're chasing your sights, your conscious thought is most likely directed to, hey, stop moving, right? Like you're thinking about you're thinking about this, right? And so when you're thinking about this, the reticle movement, um, this is another. There's another a gentleman out there by the name of Joel Turner. He has a process that he calls shot IQ, and he discusses things like closed loop and open loop control processes within neuroscience. And if you allow your brain, right, to use the subconscious mind, because we know and the thing that you mentioned like from your observation class, you mentioned priming the brain, right? You
Yeah.
did it again in this conversation. And so if you prime, you can't help but do that, right? When you're learning how to shoot, you can't help but when your brain sees the reticle in the middle of the target, even if it's moving, the panic will set in, and that's anxiety, right? The anxiety sets in, and you're like, I have to make this happen. And that's where
That's
we
bullshit.
have, yep, boom, right now. And the rifles move and the bows move, whatever device it is that you're trying to aim, bow, carbine, rifle, pistol, whatever it is. That's still that object is still in motion after you've made the decision. Like you're talking about the lag in the in the neural processing time. But then the panic sets in, and that's when you can't stop focusing on the reticle movement. You
Yeah.
can't stop focusing on that because you're not allowing your conscious mind to be calm and 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 bring even sometimes with archery, some people can't even like if they're solidified into uh the psychopathy, if you will, of target panic, dudes can't even bring a bow up. Like they'll draw a bow, they'll get it to full draw, and they'll try to bring it up to the target, and they're physically unable to bring the bow to the target simply because all of the anxiety that's going on in their mind.
Well, and you'll see good shooters. I'm not even talking. They don't even have to be like Olympic, uh, national level shooters. But just a good shooter, even a good regional shooter that is just they're good. You'll see them. They know they can tell, and you'll see if they start to uh, go in and they can feel their emotions aren't right, their
Hmm.
emotions too high, they'll stop and work. They'll do something. They'll bring their weapon system down and they'll do this. They'll take a
Hmm.
breath. They'll try to manage their emotions and then they'll come back to it. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
they'll control their emotions because they have a very keen sense of when their sympathetic nervous system is starting to get too excited, too aroused, and they can tell. They know that sympathetic system arousal when it hits a certain point is equal to bad marksmanship, bad performance,
Yep.
and when they have a very good sense of when that's happening, and when they sense it, they'll do something. Usually, it's stop for a second, take a breath, and that just gives them a little bit, calms it, and then they'll come back up and do it.
Hmm.
Sometimes that's all it takes, but you got to bring the emotion down a bit because
Right.
in the brain you have the limbic system, which is sort of the middle part, the core of the brain, the thalamus and amygdala, and all these structures. They're not intelligent like our frontal cortex is. Uh, they generate emotion. They give signals that dump hormones like adrenaline and cortisol and all these things into the bloodstream, which start this panic cycle, the fight or
Hmm.
flight cycle, the sympathetic nervous system arousal. And uh, that in the early stages of sympathetic nervous system arousal, it's actually beneficial because it'll sharpen your focus. It'll close out your peripheral vision, which will actually help you aim at your sights better. It'll increase blood flow and oxygen to your body. It'll send energy to your muscles, making them more. So at a certain level, that's a good thing. But then it hits a certain point, depending on what you're doing, where it's no longer productive. And you got to bring it back down. You have to engage the parasympathetic nervous system. And one of the fastest, easiest ways to do that is controlled breathing, because part of the sympathetic nervous system arousal is to it induces increased heart rate to push, because the whole point of it is to push oxygen and ATP into your muscles. And so doing that, increase breathing, increase heart rate, release certain hormones. You can't consciously control your heart rate, you know. So a lot of the things happening when the sympathetic nervous system gets aroused are beyond your conscious control. But one of the hacks to it is your breathing. And one of the interesting things about the sympathetic nervous system is that it has a reverse sort of response where it will trigger things in your body, but it's also receiving information about the system in the body. So, for example, it might your sympathetic nervous system might be saying increase your breathing. We need the oxygen, you know. Um, but if you consciously control your breathing, it sends a signal to the sympathetic nervous system and says, because the sympathetic nervous system is thinking increase heart rate, increase breathing, increase ATP production and distribution. And then when it gets a signal that says from the frontal cortex, basically, that says, hey, my breathing is slowing down and calming, that triggers the sympathetic nervous system to say, oh, okay, let me ramp this down a little bit. Engages the parasympathetic. And it's not that these are intelligent parts of the brain. It's that by breathing, you engage the parasympathetic, a separate set of nerves in your body. You engage those by controlled breathing, and it will then send a signal to the sympathetic and combat it and bring it back down. And the experience you have in that is a calming of this SNS arousal, which is going to help you if you're getting to the point where, like, I'm getting anxious, and like if you're going to take a shot in competition or on a hunt, and you're just getting buck fever or target, fixation or excitement, and the whole thing is starting to just collapse in on you and your sympathetic nervous system. People are watching me, you know, just stop, take a breath, and you'll notice a little reduction. But then also to bring it back, even at the highest levels of competition, I will tell you that even if you do that, you cannot escape this perceptual visual processing lag that's going to happen in your brain.
Right.
And I'd be interested when you talk to some of these high level shooters, how much time they spend when they're in their sights about to make a shot trying to correct for the movement of the reticle, and how much of it
Yeah.
is
Yep. Everybody's
how
out
much
of
of
that
it
now.
is
Yep.
yeah.
Nobody's chasing the reticle anymore. Like that's the thing. Like everybody's pretty much solidified this concept that, um, chasing the reticle is a recipe for, or an ingredient in the recipe for a missed shot. And so the thought process is we do all of the work that we can using our body position and whatever support structures it is that we have available to us to solidify the sight picture as much as possible. And the way that I explain it to my students is, um, think about these. Think of like I break it up into three parts, right? And then it's rooms. So you have the stability room, which is where you're going to make sure that like all your furniture is like feng shui, right? And you're making sure that this is all very carefully established, right? Because it has a purpose. But then the stability then lends itself to the solidarity of the aiming process, or how small can we get that that movement. And you're not going to fix a whole lot. You're not going to fix anything by hanging out in the aiming room. Matter of fact, if you hang out in the aiming room, that's like the germaphobe room, maybe. Like if you hang out in the germaphobe room, you're gonna get fucking sick. You know what I mean? Like, so we want to make sure that we do the hard work in the body position or the stability room, so that way we can just kind of flow through the aiming room real quick, look at all those parts and be like, yep, that's supposed to be there, that's supposed to be there, moving right along into the trigger control and follow through room.
Right.
And because you can't change anything in the aiming process, you always have to go back into the stability room, rearrange the furniture, get things more set, and then we got to go back into, because we're checking back and forth. It's an attention thing. So, and the goal would be is to build a shooter that has solid neural pathways. So the unconscious work is being able to identify what the sight picture is telling you, right? Whatever the wobble is. If it's a left right wobble, hey, I'm off balance. My center of gravity is off balance on the left to right axis. I need to fix that. I either need to widen my stance or shorten it, or I'm sorry, narrow it, um, or recenter my hips to be truly underneath my body's main center of gravity. But then if I've got a wobble zone going like this, that means that my body position is
Vertical
lacking
wobble.
stability fore and aft, right? So my rifle's doing a teeter totter, right? So then I don't have control over my body's fore and aft uh, axis of center of gravity. And then if it's just all kind of crazy, that means that you don't have your natural point of aim. You don't have one. And so like, that also comes into like target analysis, when we can look at a target and I don't even have to put a trigger cam on a student's gun. I can just look at the target and be like, well, yeah, you don't have a natural point of aim. That's why your groups are,
Yeah, you can see the way their
exploded.
body's sitting. You can see the
Yep.
tension in the muscles.
Yep. They're
Yeah.
trying to force things to
So
happen.
yeah. Now let me ask. I got a lot of things I want to talk about. I'm trying to narrow my brain down. I'm trying to control my ADHD. Uh, so uh, let's what the question I would ask, because you're a high level shooter. Um, what happens? Let's say you did all the best work you could do on your position, um, because we're trying to reduce uncertainty, right? So
Hmm.
by having a good load that you've developed, so that you're reducing the uncertainty of where the bullet's going to go, you're reducing that uncertainty. You've got a good
Hmm.
platform, barrel, action. You're reducing the uncertainty by mechanical, you know, sloppiness in the gun and barrel. And then you work on your position to try to make that as stable as possible and get a good scope that's really tight in its engineering and less optical errors. You've done all that sort of getting the right equipment, right, and
Hmm.
getting the right load and everything. But you still step up on a target and it's wobbling
Hmm.
outside your acceptable wobble zone and
Yep.
you're on the clock.
Hmm.
Uh, how much time do you spend saying, okay, I've done the position work. I might spend some quick amount of time doing some quick adjustments to my position, but at some point, if that's not fixing it, I still got to, I still got to
Correct.
pull the trigger.
I still have to press the shot. So usually what I'll do is if the wobble zone is unacceptable for the given target size and my position's built and so like the goal would be to develop a shooter to have the neural pathways to see what the sight picture is doing and then have that connection to their extremities, to their body, to move and maneuver to readjust that natural point of aim or to further solidify the position. But if I do that and I go through all of that and it's still wobbly, I'm going to input pressure. I'm either going to put pressure into the rifle from the buttstock forward to try to lean into it to give to see if that'll calm it down. And if that makes it worse, then I back pressure off. And now it's a game of what am I willing to give so that way I can get. If I'm backing off the rifle to release the pressure, that's generally going to increase my stability because I'm reducing the amount of influence that I'm putting into the system. However, the byproduct of that is poor recoil management. So that way I can't see where the bullet goes. But if you're in that scenario, your brain's got to make these decisions. Excuse me. The brain's got to make these decisions very, very rapidly. So, like
And
a real
we're
upper
talking
echelon.
within like a second or two.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, like if you're doing like back on the East Coast, a lot of those matches, those guys are shooting 10 position stages in 90 seconds with one single target. So that means, a very, very simple math. I have 9 seconds allocated for every single position. And that's from
And that's
start
to get
stepping
into the
up,
position, set it up,
break the shot,
and then
and
start
move.
the,
Yep.
yeah.
I got to be able to
So
get
you
from
get,
position A to B, B to C, all that shit.
so
Um,
I'm interested in like the troubleshooting process because some shooters may not have even written this down and actually because they're relying a lot on instinct and training.
mhm.
But there is a process their brain is going through, a
Yes.
troubleshooting. Like you said, the wobble zone is unacceptable, and you already explained some of your process. First one is check your feet, check your base, check your pressure in the buttstock. Add a little bit, not helping, let off a little bit. But let's say you've run through that troubleshooting through your position, it's still unacceptable, and you've gotten to the point now where it's like I just have to make this shot. I got to
Yeah.
pull the trigger.
Yep. So
So
that's where,
you're done with the troubleshooting of your position, and now I've got to take the shot. I'm looking at my sight picture. I'm looking at the wobble. What's the next step in the troubleshooting?
the next step in the troubleshooting would be if the reticle is wobbling to the point where um, it's outside of, if it's outside the constraints of the target, I'm going to use a technique called shoot on the way in. Because I know that the reticle is going to move, right? I know it's going to move and the rifle's moving along with me. So it's just like shooting skeet, right? If you're shooting skeet or a moving target with a shotgun, if you stop, if you press the trigger and then you're in your swing and you boom, you stop, you're always going to miss behind the clay because that shot needs to continue, the barrel needs to continue to move to allow that shot to fan out, right? Because what we talked about, there's time that it takes to get that shot out of the barrel. And then the time that it takes the shot to travel, however many, yards it is to the clay. So I'll shoot on the way in. If I, that at the end of the day, that's what we would call timing your shot. And it's an absolute last resort. You definitely don't want to prime your brain. You don't want to get into that habit of timing your shot. But the only way to time your shot effectively is to time it on the way in. Because if you let you're going to just basically visually track and go, okay, it's going this way and this way, this way and this way. So I'm either going to time it on the way in coming this way, or I'm going to time it on the way in coming this way. So if I know the reticle's coming this way, the time that reticle is in, depending on how much movement there is, of course, when the reticle is perhaps halfway between the edge and the center, I'm going to press the trigger. And now I'm going to know through calling my shot that the last place I saw that image of the reticle over the top of the target was halfway between center and edge. If I get away with it and I get a hit, I probably won't see where the bullet lands, but I'll at least be able to tell that I got a hit. At which point in time I'm going to be like, "Poof, all right, we're not doing that shit again. That sucked. Let's try to not do that on the next shot or the next position."
Yeah.
Because we want to minimize that.
Let's say at the top levels between like first place and second place
Mhm.
in a competition or something is because both the first and second place are going to have targets and stages where they hit that
Yep.
situation. And what separates first from second is your process, your troubleshooting process. Once you encounter this unfortunate circumstance and the way you handle it causes a higher probability of hits than second place.
Correct.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
That's the
And it's
game.
like what so like you just said, you jump into a position. Hopefully, your position creates a wobble zone within the target.
Hmm.
All right, that's what you're looking for. Wobble zone within the target. And if your wobble zone is within the target, just focus on the trigger.
Hmm.
Stop chasing your sights. Focus on the trigger. You're going to hit. Right,
Hmm.
as long as your wind call and ballistics are correct.
Yep.
Uh, but let's say it's going outside a little bit, and you don't have the time. You've done a couple quick troubleshooting checks. It didn't fix it, and you're like, I just got to press this trigger. And now you're like, yeah, I love how you said this. Me and you haven't talked about this, so I've been thinking about it, and so I love hearing your explanation and the fact that top level shooters have essentially compensated for this. Uh, like talk about timing on the way in. So you show up, you're for this example, you're aiming center mass on the
Hmm.
target. That's your plan. That's your expectation. Your goal is sight picture, crosshairs, center mass. It's wobbling and it's wobbling outside left, outside right.
Hmm.
Knowing that your visual process has a lag time and it's behind, you know that you wobble from center off to the right. Right as it hits to the right and starts to come back in,
You gotta shoot.
do you make the decision to wait until it crosses center mass before you pull the trigger, or do you
Nope.
do it a
Because
little bit before?
you have to do it a little bit before, because if you press the trigger when the reticle's at center mass, the barrel's going to keep moving, and that shot's going to get slung in the direction that the barrel's moving.
Well, not only are you compensating for the movement of the barrel, you're compensating for the lag time in the visual system and to
Yep.
send the signal to pull the trigger. So you've got to compensate. And the more you understand about the timing of this lag in the brain will tell you how much before, if you end up in that situation, how
Yeah.
soon should you pull the trigger?
Yeah. Well, okay. So if you're pressing if you're pressing the trigger on a shot that's going to a grand, right? So, um, let's see. One of my cartridges, it is, let's see, my 6BR, my 6BRA. It'll take about 1.4 seconds. 1.4 seconds to get to a grand, right? From the time the bullet uncorks from the muzzle. So you'd have to do that math and go, okay, well, where, like how much is this time that it takes, to get from here to here, to make that happen. Um,
But you can say,
and
but you can definitely say, because this is not something that's in your ballistic computer. Your ballistic computer is not
no,
calculating any of this.
no,
But we also know, like you said, uh, the 3 millimeters of movement on the shoulder translates to a
three thousandths of an inch.
yeah 3 thousandths of an inch.
Yep.
At the shoulder is going to translate to half an inch, converting it to you know the Queen's measurement.
Yeah.
Uh, but the point standing. Now you exaggerate that to 1,000 yards, right?
Right. Yep.
That 3 thousandths of an inch. Uh, what's that going to translate to at 1,000 yard target? And so you come up with this. You start to calibrate because you don't have a ballistic computer that's going to do this for you. You have to kind of come up with these rules of thumb, right? So
Hmm.
when I'm timing my shot, I'm accounting for processing lag, right?
Yep.
If my wobble zone is off the target, is it better if I look at the wobble, as soon as I detect that it's sort of hit its peak and it's going to start coming back in, do I press the trigger then? Or do I wait for it to get closer to halfway to the point of aim before I press the trigger? Like what's the timing based on distance? What are sort of some rules that a person
Yeah.
can
Dude,
come up with?
I wouldn't even know where to begin with that. I wouldn't know where to begin with that simply because, oh man, simply because it's like there's so many different factors that go into that with regard to, the whatever it is that you're dealing with in terms of, the size of the target and the amount of wobble you have. I think that would now boil down to just instinctual, um, which in the grand scheme of things is why it doesn't work really well, right? It doesn't work really well. Um, it's not a good technique, and it's therefore quite unpredictable and very difficult to replicate, which is why we don't condone it, right? We're like, hey, don't time your shot. Don't time your shot, because if you start priming your brain to time your shot, then your lizard brain, right, your subconscious is going to take over, and it's going to happen like that. It's just
I
literally
want to
going to
bring something
happen.
up. I
Yeah,
want to bring
please do.
something up. There's a study I read, and it was done by MIT about 10 years ago on visual recognition
Hmm.
time, funded by the NIH. But it's 10 years old. And So what they found is because prior to this study, sort of the prevailing view in cognitive visual perceptual science is that it's about 100 thousandths or 100 thousandths or zero point 0.1 of a second visual processing time to reach recognition.
Hmm.
And you can't respond physically to a stimulus visually until you reach recognition where your visual brain recognizes there's something to respond to, right? So there needs
Hmm.
to be recognition. And that generally was considered to be zero point 0.1 of a second. Just,
Hmm.
it seemed unavoidable. It just, that's, you know, neurons having to process subconsciously at this point. And that you consciously won't be aware of it until recognition. Like, I think in perceptual science and visual cognition science, they consider recognition the point between subconscious visual processing and conscious visual processing. That's the switch is recognition. That's the
Okay.
switch. Um, and that was considered to be zero point 0.1 of a second. Well, what they found in this study is that they were able to reduce that down not to 100th or 100 thousandths of a second, but to 0.013 of a second.
Okay. So yeah.
So 10
Okay.
times less, uh, from 100 down to 13 in reduction in
How
time.
did that happen? What was the
So what
process
they
by
said,
which that occurred?
So what they did is they took the subjects they were studying, and they started the study with they would prime them, right? That's a key part of the study. Is they would I don't remember exactly what they would prime these people for, but let's say they would show them a series of photographs in succession, and each photograph would only be exposed to the eye for starting off with 100 a point one of a second, 100 milliseconds, and they would show them a series of pictures, and then they would prime them and say, look for a dog. And
Okay.
then they would show them a series of photographs and like, was there a dog in there? And they would either say yes or no. And then they would match it up against whether there was a dog in there. And they would show them a lot of these, and a lot of them wouldn't have a dog, right? So they'd have a lot more series of photographs that they would be showing that didn't have a dog than did. And so they could narrow down statistically when there was a dog there, and did they accurately report it? How many false positives did they get, and all this stuff. And true to the research, it seemed like, 0.1 of a second was accurate. So they said, well, how let's reduce the amount of time that these pictures are being shown to them. And so they started to reduce it to instead of 0.1 of a second, 0.08 of a second, and 0.07. They got all the way down to 0.013, and these people were able to distinguish the thing that they were told to look for higher than chance. Even if they were just like lying and randomly guessing, they were performing better than that. And they got down to 0.013 versus zero point 0.1, which is 10 times lower than
Dang.
what the standard science was saying. Now, interestingly, in this study, none of the pictures were repeating. So when they said look for a dog or whatever they told them to look for, they didn't show the same picture of a dog ever twice. It was always a different picture of a dog in different size and different settings and wherever else. So, but they still were able to get down to 0.013 versus 0.1.
Mm-hmm.
And what
Mm-hmm.
that means, my interpretation of it, and a lot of other people I read, their interpretation of it is that there is the actual processing of information is much faster than we thought it was. The recognition of it comes through priming and rehearsal. And one of the reasons that the people who did this study cited as the unusual result that they got was that their subjects did repeated attempts at this over and over and over again. And so they got better at it. Their brains adapted to fast picture stimulus. And so the brain adapted and said, okay, in my normal life, I don't have to do this, but I have to do this now for this study. And it got better at it,
Okay.
which means you can train your brain to recognize things 10 times faster than normal in your everyday life if you have repeated situation and you train your brain to take fast snapshots. And what I'm thinking is that absolutely when you're in a time crunch behind sights, that's exactly what you're doing is you're taking a hyper fast um, and one thing when your sympathetic nervous system is slightly aroused, the brain operates quicker and gets more focused. We talk about time dilation when you have the
Mm-hmm.
fight or flight system kicking in. That's
Mm-hmm.
exactly what this is. The brain operates at a faster mode because it's focused on a very particular thing, which is what we're doing when we line up sight picture and do this. So if you can control your emotions and not let them get out of control, and you rehearse it, I think, and this is a prediction of mine, that the people who are better at this than others, it's because their brain has switched into this mode where it's actually processing things faster. Essentially, their recognition time is 10 times faster or
Right.
somewhere on that gradient, and is able to recognize sight picture at the right time and then go through the trigger pull process. So, for example, um, if my wobble zone is going left and right of my intended aiming point,
Mm-hmm.
am I better served to pull the trigger when it's coming towards the aiming point or moving away from it? It'd be coming in,
Yep. Yeah,
right?
it'd be coming in.
Knowing that the reality of where that crosshair is actually ahead of what I'm seeing by,
Ah,
you know. So if it's moving away, if my crosshairs are moving away from the aiming point, that means that if I pull the trigger, then the crosshairs are actually farther away than what I'm seeing by a slight
I
amount.
see what you're saying.
But if it's
I
coming
see what you're saying.
in, I assume that the crosshairs are closer than what I'm actually perceiving.
Hmm.
And so I time my shot as it comes in to my intended aiming point versus going away. And those little details dealing with wobble, I think a lot of top level shooters have figured that out. I think you just explained it a little bit ago in your own terms when you say, hey, I'm timing my shot. Sometimes I got to do it. It's not ideal,
Hmm.
but I got to do it.
Right. 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 Yeah. This is just, it's fascinating. And the other part of this too is looking at it from what happens when you lose focus, what happens when you lose concentration. And so if you allow your brain, so I call it getting loose, right? If I allow myself to have some anticipation, right? Let's just say I've got some wobble zone, because usually this won't happen. This won't happen in the prone. Just the other day I was shooting my hunting rifles and they're light. My hunting rifles are less than 10 pounds. And I've got a 7 PRC that burns about 72 grains of powder with a 180 grain bullet. And then I have a 7, I got another 7 short action Magnum that burns about 60 grains of powder with a 160 grain bullet. And then I have a 6.5 Creedmoor that burns about 40 grains of powder with a 140 grain bullet. So on the 7 PRC side, the biggest cartridge with the heaviest bullet, I had a dead chamber. The magazine, I was tuning my magazines, and for whatever reason, I didn't chamber a cartridge. My brain thought that that was going to go bang, right? But I'm laying in the prone because I'm testing the gun, I'm zeroing it, and I'm tuning the trajectory at distance. And trigger when I press the trigger, I'm going through my mantra, right? I'm going through my own internal mantra of trying my best to direct my conscious thought literally by talking to the tip of my finger. Press, 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 press. Boom, rifle goes bang. But in this case, it clicked. And the click was surprising in the sense that it didn't go off. But my reticle did not move. Nothing changed. Everything was where it was supposed to be. Now, if you allow yourself to have some wobble, maybe maybe you're shooting from the standing position off of a tripod or something, and you get a little bit of wobble from some lash in the tripod. Um, and you neglected to take the lash out. So in your brain, you're like, screw it. I'm just going to make it work. So I got some horizontal lash going on. In that same scenario, if you got a dead chamber, a shooter is, I don't know how many times more likely it is for them to anticipate. Um, and it's because there's reticle movement. Your brain's focused on the reticle movement and your conscious mind is focused on stop that instead of trusting your wobble and then focusing on the trigger press. Because even when I'm in those positions and I'm focusing on the trigger press, if I get a dead chamber, um, uh, I still sometimes I'll catch myself if I release a bad shot or an anxious shot. Let's just call it an anxious shot instead of a bad shot. Let's just call it an anxious shot.
Yeah, that's probably a better way.
Um, I notice that like in that final microsecond of time, I'll come loose from the gun. It's almost like I'll push the gun away, right? And then that disconnection occurs, and then obviously physics take over because the rifle's recoiling different now. It doesn't have the same amount of forces coming up against it, and everything just feels funky. Like you press the trigger, and you'll be like, ugh, and you'll be like, okay, that was me. At first, I would just look at it and be like, I broke a dirty shot. Now I'm looking at it and going, what are the mechanics involved in making or breaking a dirty shot? And I can always nail it down to now just a simple lack of concentration in those final microseconds before I press the trigger. because my conscious brain was directed elsewhere at something that was going on downrange, or maybe it went to the wobble of the sights, and I uh, I allowed my subconscious to start tracking the sight back and forth, and then that takes you out of that conscious zone, right? And it's very easy to let that happen.
Well,
So,
I guess like well, so um, your conscious brain is going to be focused on something. It's not like you're going to shut your brain out. So your brain is going to focus on something. We'll just call
mhm,
it your attention. Your attention is going to be on something. Um, it's probably different for someone like you than it is for maybe a more novice shooter. I think you're less susceptible to the emotional reaction
mm,
to. I think your troubleshooting process is much faster
mhm,
because you have an intuitive feel for your position. I think where you can just tell my position's good.
yep,
My position's not the problem, and you have just a faster troubleshooting process because of rehearsal. You know
sure,
what I mean? Because of experience. So your brain isn't going to, like you said, you're going to do some quick thing. Hey, I'm going up and down. Let me adjust this. This is the thing I do for my position. If it's up and down, a quick. You're going to give yourself half a second for that.
mhm,
If that didn't work, okay, moving on to the next thing. But a novice shooter isn't that confident in their position. So they're going to hit that troubleshooting step and they're going to be like, oh, my position's messed up. I'm not even sure what it is. I'm just going to start messing around. I'm going to start adjusting this, adjusting that, and they're probably adjusting the wrong thing and not getting the feedback of what the reticle's doing for their position. And they start adjusting the wrong thing. And then that doesn't work. And then the anxiety kicks in even more
yep,
because it didn't work.
yep.
And so I think for a lot of novice shooters or maybe mid-level shooter, every attempt in the troubleshooting process that doesn't work, anxiety grows.
Builds, yeah,
And obviously, building anxiety is not part of the troubleshooting process. You know
yeah.
what I mean?
We want to avoid that as much as possible.
Yeah. So for the novice shooter, like what is the advice? Yeah, they have a troubleshooting process, which if they go to a course like yours, you're going to give it to them. Like go through this process. As they go through that process, they hit one where it doesn't work. Uh, do they just continue to focus on it and work on it, or do they move on to the next one? You know what I mean?
What I
Or do
tell,
they just say, hey, I got to deal with it. I got to time my shot for this one, and then go back
well,
home after this and work on it.
what I do is I force whenever we get introduced to alternate shooting positions, I don't allow them. I used to go straight to steel, and then teach the alternate position class like on the long range line. And I noticed that I was getting better results by taking them from the long range line and putting them over on the 100-yard paper line, and then shooting them on paper for about 40 rounds. Um, Depending on the proficiency of the shooter, like if they're already shooting really good groups and it's, it's a good shooting class, um, you'll see them progress faster. You'll be able to go 20 rounds or so on paper before that they're like, okay, yeah, you guys are holding consistent groups. Um, and now we can move out to steel. But what I tell them is that I want you to build the perfect position. And the reason I want you to build the perfect position is I want you to prime your brain. I don't use this term prime. I basically say I want you to program your brain to understand what right feels like. And I basically tell them, I don't care if it takes you 10 times of adjusting your natural point of aim to release one shot. I don't care. I would much rather you take and have the discipline to readjust your position, your natural point of aim until you get it right. Because what you're doing is every time you see something wrong and you force your body to correct for it, you're feeding the subconscious with information that is then going to be able to be recalled when you have to do it for real, right? When you have to do it from an improvised shooting position, maybe it's not a perfect position, but I would much rather you get those neurons connected to that vision or that visual stimulus is telling me that I have to do this shit's going on right here. So now I have to change this up and now I reduce it down to this. Once they make that connection, they really start picking up the pace and then the shot groups start tightening up. And then they're like, oh, okay, I understand. And then we go over to steel and then they have a much better opportunity to have a greater degree of success on steel because they've been able to see, hey, this is what I'm actually capable of with regard to marksmanship on paper at 100 yards away, removing all of the external factors of wind and data.
So, what I think is this an accurate sort of estimation of what you're saying is that um, with a novice shooter or someone that's accepting being a novice shooter, regardless of skill level when they come over, is you're putting them in a position, like you said, 100 meters, something close. Paper, because it's less stimulating than steel,
Mhm.
is you're taking the anticipation of I need to hit and hear the ring of the steel, or I need to hit here, and you're also
Right.
by getting closer, you're eliminating a variable of like wind or some of the
Hmm.
physics and
Hmm.
everything, and you're isolating the position, and
Right.
then you're saying, okay, here's the troubleshooting process for the position. And by the way, we're slowing time down to work through the troubleshooting positional process. Don't worry about a clock. There's
Nope.
no, because when you put someone on the clock, that becomes their goal and their focus, and it's always in the background building anxiety.
Hmm.
So you take away that anxiety and you're saying, hey, just troubleshoot.
Just troubleshoot.
Troubleshoot and then pull the trigger when it seems right.
Yep.
And then you do that with repetition, and it's strengthening the association in the neurons with the
100%.
sight picture, with the body position, until it becomes automatic. This
That's
automaticity.
that's the goal, right? That's the goal. And then I tell them, hey man, if you start catching yourself timing your shots, I need you to step away. I want you to step away because if you start forcing this, now what we're going to have is negative reinforcement and we're going to start priming the brain to think that this is acceptable behavior and it's not acceptable behavior. It's like teaching my son Luke how to catch a baseball, throw and catch a baseball. We go out for a catch, a catch session and we could only be in session for like 10 minutes, but if he catches like eight solid, eight solid catches, like that ball is in the middle of the mitt and it's slapping and like he's feeling confident. After I'm looking at him, I'm reading his body language, I'm reading his emotions, and I'm like, all right, we're done. We're done for the day. And then he's like, why, Dad? Why are we done for like we just started? I'm like, well, because we're gonna end this session with a positive emotional reinforcement
Yeah.
of having that repetition because now when you come back to it, you're going to go, I remember how this works. I remember how this
Yeah.
works.
And then also tell him, go sleep for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. Go through a sleep cycle real quick. It's cause cognitive memory.
Okay, solidify. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I didn't. Yeah, that's not realistic for a lot of people to do. But
Sure, but
uh,
it's but it what you're doing is you're basically saying this is how your brain learns, right? This is how your brain learns.
and I want to say because I think sometimes I get lost in because you understand a whole lot of stuff that other people might not, and it's easy for me to, and you to like talk over people because you understand a lot of things and whatever. So I just wanted to go back and clean up a few concepts that we talked about
Yeah, please do.
for anybody that might not be following certain things. Like every time, so the neurons in your brain operate and get stronger every time one neuron fires. Every neuron is connected anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 other neurons in the brain. Anywhere from 1 to 10,000 other neurons. And every time a neuron fires, it sends a signal through all of, let's say it's 10,000 connected neurons. Some of them it sends a signal to shut those neurons off, and then it sends signals to other neurons to turn them on and make them fire and continue the chain. Um, every time you do that, every time that neuron fires and does that, there's a little biological process that happens in that neuron, in the axon that comes off of it to connect to other neurons, where it becomes better insulated and a better conductor of the electrical signal that goes down it, which makes the signal stronger. It's called an axon, and the more you use that, the stronger the signal gets and is kept without loss. Which means the ones that it's trying to excite, it's going to do a better job of exciting those neurons, and then the chain continues. And so there's a saying from Hobbes where the neurons that fire together wire together. And so as you do that, this is where we create the muscle memory. They'll say 2,000 to 3,000 repetitions. 2,000 to 3,000 repetitions. It could be as much as 10,000, 20,000 repetitions that are needed, depending on if you're having to undo stuff, that was previously programmed. So as you do that, the brain is sort of limited in the total amount of excitement that it can handle, electrical activity that it can handle before you have a seizure, or it just gets too confusing. The brain can't focus it. So, but what happens is, like, your heartbeat and these other sort of automated systems in your body are like guided by these super highways that are super efficient. And what you want to do is rehearse something to where you build up that muscle memory, those axons, that neural connection, until it reaches automaticity, they call it. So, and if it reaches automaticity or habituation, then what that means is that the frontal cortex doesn't have to get involved anymore. So the frontal cortex doesn't have to feed back into it to tell it what to do. It becomes automatic, just like your heartbeat. And what that does is, like your body position, like when you go to set up a position, I guarantee there's a whole bunch of neurons in your brain for someone like you that's been doing it for many years and has hundreds of thousands of repetitions. There's a whole bunch of body mechanics and everything that require no conscious thought for you. Whereas a novice shooter, like a baby learning to walk when they're, 1, 2 years old, they have to think about every step and their balance, or when you have a 15, 16-year-old that's learning to drive a car, they have to like literally think about where the blinker is before they use it. Whereas an experienced driver just doesn't even think about it. It's like, boom, there's the blinker, boom, there's the windshield wiper, boom, there's the brake. It's all habituated. It's all automaticity, which frees up the frontal cortex to deal with other important things. Like when you're shooting, you got to be watching the wind. You got to be looking for your shot. You need that frontal cortex availability to think through problems. And if you're spending it all focused on your position and how to adjust your position and all these things, it's robbing you of other things you could be thinking about that are going to make you better, that you need to think about to get to a high level. Because at the highest level shooting, like you're never completely on automaticity. You're always thinking about something when you go take a shot.
Right.
Right. I don't care how good you are. Your brain is always fully occupied when you go to take a shot. It's just that you have automatized a whole bunch of stuff, which frees up the ability for your frontal cortex to think about certain things. And a novice shooter can't do that, which is why they have to, not just do the drills you teach them, but then go back home and do those things like dry firing, for position purposes, until it becomes automatic. You know what I mean? And that just frees up your frontal cortex and your attention to focus on the other things that you've been neglecting and didn't have the mental capacity to have to deal with. So I think obviously rehearsal. I mean, I'm not saying anything new. Rehearsal. You can't ever. There's no magic sauce. That's
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. There is no magic sauce.
there's no magic sauce. There's no guru that's going to say, come to a 3-day course and then you're going to be a top level shooter. It's always, if they know what they're talking about, are always going to be, I'll give you some ideas, then go rehearse, do it, build automaticity, And for a lot of new shooters, it's frustrating because you want to get to like the high level things that you should be thinking about during a shot, but you can't get there because they've still got to learn how to walk. Like they're still learning
Right.
how to move their body to stabilize their shot, reduce the wobble, all those sorts of things. And then when they don't get it, if you're a trainer and you start putting pressure on them, like on the clock and putting difficult shots in front of them and all
It's
that,
just going to fall apart.
you're activating the sympathetic nervous system. You're causing a panic, and there's a seesaw. Every time you activate the sympathetic nervous system, you're reducing cognitive function. It's a zero sum game. The more emotional someone is, the less cognition they have. So if you induce that emotional response in students too early, um, you're destroying building automaticity. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, and so another thing that we try to do at our classes is right off the bat. I mean, generally speaking, shooters are quite they're quite they're quite alpha in the sense of they're very result driven, meaning like the shot is going to tell you whether you were successful in your attempt immediately, right? It's an immediate yes you hit or no you didn't, right? And so what we try to do is at least get them to understand that no matter whether you hit or miss, you still have to look at it as a learning experience. You should be analyzing your hits as deeply as you analyze your misses. Because by doing that, now you're releasing the emotional attachment to the outcome and you're just literally looking at it as all data and saying, all right, well,
And a big part of that goes into, again, priming yourself. When you go
mhm,
into your training exercise, when you go to snap in or go to the range that day and it's just on your own, or whether they come to your course, um, like when you go grab your weapon and your tripod and you go to practice, and
mhm,
going through your course is really just it's practice. It's like quality practice, you know.
mhm,
Uh, but even at home when you're doing it, it's practice. And uh, if you're going into it primed with a goal, which is hit or miss, hit success, miss failure, then of course emotionally you're going to respond to the success or failure of that goal. If
right,
I hit, I'm happy. If I miss, I'm angry or frustrated. And the problem with that is it misses the entire thing we're talking about, which is the goal should be I'm building automaticity. I'm programming my neurons. I'm working through automating my troubleshooting process so I can free up thought. And I'm isolating a certain thing when I go to the range. I go to snap in, I'm isolating body position and stability. I'm isolating my load and the ballistics of my load. I'm isolating whatever it is. I'm zeroing my rifle. That's the goal. I'm building data. That's the goal. Isolate the goal, and that becomes it's not hit or miss. I used to pull my hair out when I would be training snipers, or I'd go to usually at a school where I can control sort of the goals and outcomes. It wasn't as big of a deal, but when I would just go on a range day, um, I would put a bunch of steel out. I'd have a plan, and then all these snipers would sit down, and they would just start blowing ammo, and it didn't matter. They would miss a target 10 times, get all frustrated, and keep shooting at it, blow through a whole box until they hit it, and then the second they hit that steel, I'm like, all right, next target. I'm like, whoa, you just shot
yeah,
20 rounds at a target, missed 19, hit one, and then you're just going to move on? Like, what did you get from that? Just the
right,
happy ring of the steel? Like, it's a waste of
yeah,
time.
yeah,
I mean, like, what? Because their goal was hit or miss. I hit, I'm
right,
successful. I miss, I'm a failure. And they don't like failure. So,
not at all,
and it's because their goals going into that range were completely wrong. Like you go in and hey, today we're working on wind calling. Today we're working on position. Today we're working on whatever, working with your ballistic computer or whatever. And they would forget that and it just came down to hit or miss the steel. And again, it's a misalignment of appropriate goals, which is then going to feed back to your priming because you're going to prime yourself for that goal. And then whether or not you
Yeah.
achieve it or not is going to cause an emotional response. And the change continues. You have a high emotional response, which degrades the training. And now, I will say though, there are some times when maybe after all things have been worked out, maybe you do need to have a training evolution where you're in specific fashion trying to evoke emotional response specifically to train them to manage their emotional response.
So I'm glad you brought that up because I've been doing more somatic breathing exercises lately, and um, with very, very focused outcomes, meaning like the goal is to engage your sympathetic nervous system through this type of breathing pattern. And it works. Like, you want to get your fingers tingling, you want to feel what it's like to be all hopped up on Mountain Dew. Guess what? Just sit down and breathe for freaking 10 minutes and you're going to
Like
get that
hyper.
response. And oh yeah, well, yeah, like just uh it involves a lot of deep belly breathing and some breath holds, right? Um, it's all carefully choreographed from a physiological perspective, and it's obviously connected to your neurobiology too. And so it's invoking that system, that sympathetic nervous system response. But you're not like out of breath, like you put like you do a stress shoot. You're just like, you're just gonna run 400 meters. We're gonna stress you out. We're gonna run 400 meters. It's like, nah, dude, that just makes you breathe harder. Now, I might have a shot timer, I might have a qual leaning over my head or hanging over my head. So that potentially could invoke an emotional response, sympathetic nervous system response. But just the physical activity of running, most of the dudes that we train, like on the professional side, they're already in shape, right? So a 400-meter run is not that big of a deal. They're not getting a sympathetic nervous system response. They're not actually seeing what their body does in response to that nervous system stimulus. But if you sit and breathe and you have that somatic experience, dude, your fingers start to tingle, your toes will start to tingle. You'll start to feel that euphoric
Yes.
sensation
Yeah. Right.
of pointed breathing exercises to invoke nervous system response.
Yeah. So
And I, and
if
I,
the goal is to work on um, calming yourself down, and this is a good exercise, and you don't even have to be behind a rifle to do it. So if anyone that's ever been in a situation where they're claustrophobic or can't breathe, that's one of the fastest ways to trigger your SNS. And so I used to do um, a lot of swimming when I was in the military,
mhm,
and I got really big into um, like free diving, like static apnea, breath hold competition type stuff. And if you hold your breath, what causes you to panic when you can't breathe is not lack of oxygen, it's the amount of CO2 in your body.
mhm,
Like the
mhm,
receptors in your brain detect elevated amounts of CO2, and that will trigger the sympathetic nervous system very quickly. So if you want to trigger an SNS response, just specifically so that you can try to calm it down and work on bringing it back down, and there's a decent amount of literature on this now. Just do some breath hold work, particularly if you want to speed it up. Don't breathe in and then try to hold it for a minute, 2 minutes until you are like, you know,
yeah, yeah,
breathe out. Get rid of the oxygen to CO2 level ratio. Breathe out and then hold your breath after letting out your breath, and you'll much faster hit this sort of emergency need to breathe.
mhm,
It'll kick in your sympathetic nervous system,
mhm,
and then take a breath in, and put a heart rate monitor on or check your heart rate, and then breathe and work on mental work and breathing to bring it back down to your normal heart rate. Let's say my normal heart
mhm,
rate is 70 beats a minute.
mhm,
I breathe out, I stall there until I start to like see my heart rate get up to like 80 beats a minute, 90 beats a minute, and then I breathe again and I see how fast I can bring it back down.
Okay.
And one of the things that's going to do in your brain, because you don't want to get too used to having too much CO2, like that. That's not necessarily helpful.
Hmm.
But what you're doing is you're um, allowing your brain to make associations and connections to the feeling of discomfort and an elevated sympathetic nervous system arousal without causing panic. Because for a lot of people, because they don't experience SNS arousal very often, when they do experience it, it becomes a self-licking ice cream cone, where just the fact
Hmm.
that it's elevated causes it to be more elevated and causes them to panic more just because of that feeling.
Right. Got it.
And a lot of people that deal with chronic stress and anxiety, they're actually causing anxiety because of anxiety, if that makes any
Right.
sense.
It's a
So by doing this,
perpetuation.
yeah, it becomes perpetual, you know, thing. So if you induce this voluntarily through breath deprivation and elevated CO2, just enough where you feel it happening, then engage in breathing and see how fast you bring it down. You're exposing the brain to stress, and your ability to understand what that feels like and know that everything's going to be okay. It has been shown that in every other area of your life, it reduces anxiety and stress. So, I mean, that's applicable to some shooters, not all of them.
Yeah.
But if you find someone if you find yourself like doing it and you become really anxious so easily, you're super triggered every time you get behind the rifle. I mean, you've seen students like this. I've seen students like
Hmm.
this. I mean,
Hmm.
no matter how chill the drill is, the second they get behind the rifle, you can see their body mechanics in their face. Like they're anxious. It doesn't matter if they're just zeroing a gun.
Right.
They're anxious about their performance
For
and hit or
whatever
miss.
reason. For
Yeah,
whatever reason. Yeah. A
and
lot
you
of
and
times.
usually it's just because they are incapable of dealing with stress in and of itself.
Yep. Yeah. Because.
So by doing things like that, which you don't even have to be behind a rifle to do it, you can start to manage your anxiety and stress that way. Because I mean, you have to get that out of the way before you can even get down to the real business of training to do this. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like if
Yeah.
that's if that's
Yep.
a if that's a roadblock, yeah, I'm sorry, you're just not going to progress. You're not going to be able to focus on, like we've talked about a lot of very nuanced things that go on in your brain when you go
Yep.
through the process of shooting. If you're just having anxiety for anxiety's sake, you're never going to be able to mentally. It's signal to noise. So when we say this troubleshooting that we've talked about, that's the signal that you're trying to receive and think about. But if it's drowned out by noise of anxiety just for anxiety's sake, you'll never be able to pick out the signal mentally. So you've got to quiet the background noise so that your brain can pick out the signal, whether it's a visual signal or a somatic signal from where your body, proprioception, like where's my body at, where are my feet at, where's my shoulder at, where's the rifle hitting me, where's my
Hmm.
finger out on the trigger, what's my breathing like. These are all very signal specific things that you have to detect within your own body. And then visually, where's the reticle, how's it moving? These are a lot of things to think about. And those are all specific signals. You want to make most of those as automatic as you can so that you don't have to think about them. But if the noise in the background is this elevated SNS system because anxiety, just the idea of getting behind a rifle while other people are watching, is driving your anxiety through the roof,
Yeah.
that's drowning out in your brain. The noise signal in your brain is drowning out any specific signal that you need to be using for troubleshooting and working through a problem. And if that's what someone's dealing with, then maybe something like a little bit of breathing exercises, deprive your breathing a little bit to get yourself up and then calm yourself down and just do that because you can do that watching TV. You don't even have to be on a range or anything. And
Hmm.
that's going to help your brain start to associate, hey, just because my SNS is aroused doesn't make it an actual emergency. That doesn't mean that in the real world there's an emergency. I can bring it back down. And
Right.
that helps reduce the noise so you can detect the signals to go through the troubleshooting that we've been talking about.
Well, Owen, man, this was incredibly educational, dude. This was incredibly educational, and I want to save some for follow-on episodes with you because I think we're probably going to get a lot of questions as a result of this. And I think the next step would be to kind of like break this all down, um, and do it step by step by step, so that way we can give people an idea of how to train and how to apply what we've talked about in this hour and a half worth of conversation. So because I think if we just keep going, it's just going to keep going, down and down and down,
Yeah.
which is a great thing because I think it's great information, but I also want to give people a chance to digest some stuff first. So, um, uh, let's sit down and have a conversation about what a follow-on episode is going to look like, and where we can take the listener, on that next step with regard to, some more dialed in processes and like a step by step, hey,
Yeah.
do this along the way.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah, man. That always an absolute pleasure to talk with you, man. It's always super educational, and I love having these types of conversations to be able to kind of like go deep under the hood and figure out where all the wiring's going, because that's really the name of the game here, right? So, thanks a lot for your time, man. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Um, we will. We're also, I'd like to have you come in when we release Modern Day Sniper Monthly in 2025 again, because I think that obviously from, your military background, as well as your background in physics and psychology, and a little bit of neuroscience, like it all brings something to the table. So there's definitely some things I want to talk to you about with regard to, the professional side of the house as well. So outside of just marksmanship.
Absolutely, brother.
Well, thanks a lot, man. I'm going to go ahead and we'll go ahead and call this here, but stay on with me real quick because I want to have a conversation with you before we jet out of here. So